Welcome to On Top of the Covers, a weekly podcast by Orlove dedicated to all of you amazing creative visionaries and entrepreneurs and artists, makers, disruptors, people around the world that are creating, as we usually like to say, and in this case are ultimately contributing in some way or shape or form to the culture of music, or you just have an infatuation and love of music like everybody does. And so we have really great conversations and feature inspirational stories of people contributing to the culture of music, how they do it, or creatively, artistically, personally, professionally, what were some of the things that led them into that, and what are some of the other endeavors that they get into as well. For those tuning in, maybe you're familiar, maybe you're not, it's nice to meet you. I'm Matt Gottesman. I'm your host and director of the Orlove brands. And you guys can always reach out to me at Matt Gottesman on Instagram. You guys know that I answer each and every single text, DM, reply, response. I would love to get your guys' feedback. I've been answering your guys' DMs for about 8-9 years now. So I try to be on it as much as possible. And, we say that music is really one of the biggest connectors in the world, and it's just this common bond. So we wanted to open up the conversations around the art or its contributors, its, the missions. And we really want to show you unconventional ways and different paths. And that's really what it's all about. So we're going to dive right in. And I've got another incredible guest, great background, very humble, very awesome, and, really pursuing a lot of her dreams. Lisa Kocay, she's a music journalist and freelance writer for Forbes Life. And we're going to be talking about juggling work with side passion projects and balancing, working in opposite industries and quite a few other topics. And this is something I'm very passionate about, because I've always said that we're more than one thing and we have multiple interests. And especially if we have skill sets, it doesn't mean that those skill sets only have to be applied to one area. And I'm really grateful we're living in this new era where you're seeing that with people, where no longer are they having to be confined to just this one thing, and that's the blueprint and that's the way you should do it. So it's a very, very, very passionate topic for me. And I'm really excited to be talking about this with Lisa. And just a quick background on her. She's a journalist interested in music, food, wine, spirits. She covers those interests as a freelance writer for Forbes Life. Full-time, she is a content management coordinator at an investment firm. And previously, she interned at Forbes and CNN. And she's a graduate of Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism and Lehigh University. Amazing. And you'll most likely find her at a concert trying new restaurants. So Lisa, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And I was really excited when we were discussing before the show the types of topics and themes, because as you can tell, I'll probably go on some tears, and I really want to get your feedback. And a lot of our listeners really, they're creative in a lot of different ways, or they're visionaries, or they have a lot of ideas and they're bringing them to the world. And sometimes they're not always understood right away, or they just want to express themselves. And I think that, being able to talk about these things probably is a form of therapy for our listeners in some ways. So, before we get into it, we always do the rapid fire questions first. Again, just wanting to be different. I know a lot of times people save those for last, but we never do anything like everybody else. And it's always really great to see the interest of the guests. So if you're ready, we can dive right into them.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Okay. Question number one, which is always an interesting one. If all music, Armageddon, God forbid, happens and all music is gone, and you can save only 3 albums to listen to for the rest of your life, what would they be?
Okay, so this one's kind of a tricky one,
Right?
because I have so much different styles of music that I really like. But what I think would be the best 3 and would offer the most diversity, if this is all I can listen to for my entire life, hands down, Worlds by Porter Robinson. In my opinion, that's the greatest album ever made. I love Porter. That album just speaks so much to me. And the second one would have to be Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites by Skrillex, just because hearing that is what got me into electronic music. And that's what kind of started it all for me and really started this passion. And then I think in order to make it diverse and not have to listen to the same kind of things all the time, it's kind of basic, but 18 Months by Calvin Harris, just because there's so many happy songs to that album. And it's really nostalgic for me in a way where it reminds me of when I first started going to music festivals. And every time I listen to that album, it brings back good memories. So I feel like in a sense, all of these albums are pretty nostalgic. So I think they'd be good and like balance out different listening.
I like that. I like the thought process too of like, well, I know I'm going to have different moods and different times and
Mhm.
different, different feelings. So let me make sure I get to all of those. And those are great albums, by the way, really great albums. And
Thanks.
number two question sometimes relates to number one, depending on how you see it. But name an influential person,
Mhm.
living, non-living. I always tell people like you can go as far back as like Leonardo da Vinci, Caesar, whoever, or a current living person, any one of these artists, great artists, whoever it might be, that if you could interact with for one night and have a conversation with, who would they be?
It would definitely have to be Anthony Bourdain.
Oof, good
I
one.
usually don't get like sad about celebrity deaths, but that one hit me really hard. I feel like he was so influential in so many ways. I love his book Kitchen Confidential. I also love his show Parts Unknown. And what I think is like really cool about what he did is he brought so many cultures and different types of food to people all around the world. But I feel like for those who are trepidatious about traveling or uncertain about new types of food, I think he made it really approachable for those people.
Such a great person,
Seriously.
right? He's such a good, and he also broke a lot of barriers and boundaries, right? For like what's acceptable for, because normally, a chef had to only be a chef and,
Yeah.
a journalist had to only be a journalist. And I feel like he really did it his way. And he kind of showed that authenticity for the win always.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like I love how unapologetically brash he was.
That.
And he was just always so himself, which I loved and very honest.
And I think that truly is, I think what made it such a great loss is because people really honor, oh man, if he could say it, if he or she, can say that, I want to be able to say that. I think when anytime people really show up as their whole authentic selves, it means the world to those that are still trying to find their voice. So great one. That's the first time we've heard Anthony Bourdain, but that would be that'd be an amazing conversation too. I can only imagine the type of conversations we would have. Okay, question three. In your opinion, what's the best music focused film of all time for you? And for context, this
Mhm.
can be like a docuseries or a
Mhm.
documentary or a fictitious film. It doesn't have to be real either. It's just that music is somewhere a part of its core.
So for me, I kind of look at this more on soundtrack base
Mm,
than actually just focusing on
nice.
music specifically. My favorite film of all time is Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino. And what I really love about the music in that is I feel like it really intertwines the scenes really well. And it just really adds a lot to the movie and really sets the scene and like gets the mood. And obviously there are like so many great songs in that movie. Like who doesn't love Son of a Preacher Man?
Right?
And I also really like the song Yes, You'll Be a Woman Too. Then Mia Wallace is dancing. So lots of good picks in there.
That's one of the greatest answers I've ever heard to that question, period, because I totally feel you on when we look at a movie, but it's because of the soundtrack and the transitional points from song to scene
Mhm.
kind of give you the vibe overall. And so it's like a very integrated component. And by the way, that's one of the most amazing albums, by the way. So, and movies. I mean, I feel like I return to that at least once a year, especially since it's like on Netflix. So amazing. And the final question, what's an important book, podcast, or Audible that has helped you navigate, your creativity and passion in writing and expanding your interests?
So I have to go back to Anthony Bourdain.
Yes.
His book, Kitchen Confidential, just really helped like reignite my passion for food. I've been really steeped in the food industry my entire life. My mom, she used to own a catering company, so
Mm,
I've always been around like cooking and baking. I love cooking and baking myself. I like to say I make the best chocolate chip cookies from scratch. And I've worked in a lot of restaurants and things like that. So when reading his book, it really reconnected me with that past part of my life and how much I loved it. And in that way, it also strengthened me in like why I want to do food writing. I don't read books twice at
mm.
all, really, except that's the only book I've read twice.
Right. That's actually an interesting point. That's true. I think there's only maybe two or three books that I've read twice, three, four times. Everything else, half the book. No, either half or all the way through. But there's a few. Incredible. So before we jump into it, because I know I gave bit about your background, but I would love for the audience to get to know a little bit further this wide array of interests. How do we get at least up to today? Like, where are we at? How do we get here? So this question is always like the same usually for anybody, which is, what's the journey been like? You graduated from Columbia University and Lehigh, and then walk us from there through now all the things that you're doing, and we'll riff from there on some of these other topics.
Yeah, so giving like a little more background to
Yeah.
that was ever since I was a kid, like probably when I was like 6 years old, I've been saying I wanted to be a journalist. And actually, my dream was to go to Columbia University and live in New York City. So, very happy that I made that happen. I think Lehigh has a great journalism program, and they have everyone who's studying journalism be part of their newspaper, which I found really helpful because it
Mm.
got me to explore different types of writing. And that's when I fell in love with lifestyle writing. I continued to pursue that at Columbia University. And actually, what's funny is when I was there, I thought I specifically wanted to go into just only food writing. So I took a lot of classes in food writing and really focused on that. My thesis was actually on a food writing thing. I didn't take any art critiquing classes, which looking back, I really wish that I did. And it was when I started interning at Forbes Life that I was focusing a lot on food and wine and spirits. And then one day I just wrote a piece on EDC Las Vegas because I've gone to that so many times and I love it. And when I wrote it, I started thinking, why don't I do this more? I love music. It comes so naturally to me. This is something I should try out more. And yeah, now I love it.
Incredible. Well, interestingly enough, I have found that sometimes the things that we either go to school for or the things that we, have in our minds, we don't always know these newer other things that come in out of nowhere, and I went to school for international business, completely unrelated, but I was always a tech geek, and my family actually always wanted me to constantly explore my writing and constantly write. And I had teachers who always were backing me up like, hey, I think you should keep working on this. And it's interesting. We never realized until like later on, it's like, oh, wow, like I'm now writing about all these things. And the other thing that I like that you said is you explored writing about EDC and then, oh, why don't I do this more? And then you started to. And I love that you gave yourself permission to do that, because a lot of times I think people feel like, well, who am I to talk about this? And I always say, well, if it's an interest, you should definitely talk about it. You know what I mean? So like, what could you say to expand on that, in terms of, giving people this idea, this permission of like, look, there's nothing set in stone that it has to be just this one thing.
What's really nice about being a contributing writer for Forbes Life actually is that I don't have to pitch anything. And so I'm able to focus on different things that I like that are within my beat. And once I stopped interning there, I was thinking, I don't need to make it all about food. Granted, I do love food, but why can't I explore this other side of me? And it really has given me a broad range of topics to cover. And what I particularly like about not having to pitch anything because we publish at will is that whenever I get pitched something, I can just choose things that really speak to me and that I'm really passionate about. And I get to cover it regardless of what anybody would say.
I love that. With the podcast, especially with one of my first podcasts, people would pitch, and it's great, but I publish at will like you. And it's funny because I love seeking out people where I'm like, I want to interview you. And like, me? Really? I'm like, that's exactly why I want to interview you. Because they're really into their thing, or they're really enjoying the process of who they're becoming in it and what they're contributing to that industry or what it might be. And so it is fun when you can publish at will. Right. And I think it's an amazing feeling too, right? That you don't have to have like, this, you will only do this and this is how it'll be. Now you are doing content management for an investment firm as well, right?
Yes.
What's that like? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about it. So I gotta be honest, I knew nothing about finance
Right.
when I got this job. When they asked me to write something, I immediately thought, there's no way I'm gonna get this interview. I know literally nothing about finance, even though like finance and economics are different. I tried to take an economics class at Lehigh, And after the first test, I dropped out. I was like, I have no idea what this is. And I got hired and they had me read a lot of books about it. And I was like, okay, this isn't as complicated as it seems. So it's been like a really interesting process for me to be able to learn more about this. And since I do the content management, I'm able to read a lot of things that I don't necessarily write and to be able to get a better understanding of it, which I think is really cool because then I get to use both sides of my brain. Like I have like this creative side that I get to use that I'm really passionate about. And I get to use this other side where it's something I don't know as much and I can continue to learn about. I mean, now I know a lot more than I used to know, obviously. But it's a great way to balance both of those out. And that's part of the reason I wanted to do journalism, because I feel like you never stop learning because you're always talking to new people and always getting different perspectives and learning about their experiences.
You know, what I was listening to, and it's what's incredible about it is that I think that people don't realize that in order to create content, we have to go down that, you know, the rabbit hole of learning in everything. And it does bring us to areas where I might not have otherwise learned about it. And because I'm either wanting to talk about it or I'm asked to talk about it, well, I don't want to just throw things up there just to throw things up there. I actually want to know, I want to have an opinion about it, or I want to relay some information of value, right? So you're right. It forces us into industries we never would have thought of. And I was thinking, so I'm a really big advocate of blockchain and crypto, and it's just interesting that I know why I like it, but the more people kept asking me online about it, I'm like, okay, before I explain this, let me learn, you know, how to best, you know, understand this information, and B, how to make it in English for the general public, you know. Does that happen? Does that happen with you? Like sometimes, I mean, you learn these incredible topics, especially in finance, and then we'll jump back over to music and food and here in a moment. But like, does that happen where as a content creator, you know, you're learning incredible information? You said, yeah, it's not as complicated as it seems, but there's this kind of duality, right? Between the way you learn and understand it and the best way you can express it to the world in a way that they understand it.
Yeah. So usually when there's something as complicated as that, I'm not the one writing the data, it's more of the experts. But whenever I'm proofreading and editing, there are some times where I'm reading something and I think this has a lot of jargon and this article isn't necessarily meant for financial professionals. It's meant for like a general audience. So I'll tell my boss, like, hey, I think that we need to rephrase this because it's a little complicated to be reading it. And we can also sometimes do that with the charts we create. I look at it, I'm like, I have no idea what this means. We should find another way of doing this.
It's so true. Well, and you're filling a very significant gap that happens with a lot of brands and businesses where they want to speak their speak to the world. And I'm like, no, but the people you serve do not understand your stuff, because if they did, they would already be doing it and they wouldn't be your customers or clients. You know? Right. So it's that ability to turn the jargon into, you know, simplicity for the people you serve. So it's a big role. I have to bring that to the forefront, because I sometimes think that people don't realize like the power of communication is everything, especially if you're trying to speak to a vast audience. You know?
Yeah. And I feel like particularly for music as well, like how it translates back to that is whenever I'm writing for Forbes Life, I think most people who read the site aren't coming here for dance music unless you're following me. Like maybe that's the reason you come to it. So maybe you're browsing the site and you're like, oh, what is this? Like I said, not many people are coming to that site just for like that niche topic. So I think when writing, how is a way I can make this more approachable to people who don't necessarily understand this kind of music? And one thing one of my professors told me once is, in whatever you're making, you have to become like a mini expert in it. You have to be able to talk about it in layman terms that people can better understand and get a grasp of.
It's the greatest advice. I received that too from a mentor in business once. He was like, I love your brain. I love everything you're saying. I'm like, yeah. He's like, none of us know what you're talking about. And he would say like, he's like, when you go into that room, just talk to them the way that they would best understand, especially in business. But I thought, you know, what you're doing is, in my opinion, is genius as a content creator, and just from my perspective, because you're exactly right. People wouldn't normally come to Forbes for that. but you're giving them diverse topics, and you're taking an audience that the world is interested in music in one way or another. And it's cool because you're able to welcome them into that side of things, and relay to them and expose them to really new and interesting ideas and art. And then using a platform that is a well-known platform to do that, I feel like it's just a win all the way around. It's a win for Forbes, it's a win for the audience, and it's a win for you because you all get to kind of provide value in doing so, right?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, at least that's how I'm understanding it. I mean, and I think it again, because they gave you the ability to express across, food and wine and spirits and music and art, and all these things. I mean, that is life, and when we're not so only about the business, there's an entire life happening around us, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Going back to what you said earlier, I feel like it definitely seems that way for me, that I feel like I really benefit from it. I think Forbes, or hopefully, they think they benefit from it. I feel like it adds some diversity to the section. And yeah, I think readers benefit from it as well.
How's it been for you since doing that piece on EDC Las Vegas? Like what has that kind of transpired to, and what have been some of the experiences or some of the pieces you've been most proud of? Or not everybody always knows this, but sometimes when we go deeper into content, it kind of pulls us into like new experiences, or new people are like, you know what, you should come take a look at this event for yourself. And it leads to these crazy relationships sometimes, good relationships. But I would love for you to explain like what's been some of that like since you've expanded.
For specifically events or just anything in
All
general?
of it. Yeah. Like, well, content in general, but also, especially with like music and where's that kind of taking you to?
Yeah. So because like I said, I didn't really do any like art critiquing classes when I was in grad school. I felt like when I first started focusing on music journalism, I really had to teach myself a lot. It's kind of difficult because you can't just say the same thing over and over to describe music. You really have to listen to it and really know what you're doing. And I think at first, especially when I was like much younger and like how I was listening to music, I really had to teach myself that and really be able to navigate that. And that's also another reason I love writing about food, because you can't just say things were delicious. I think that it's pretty easy for most news articles, I guess, if you're just putting out the news really quickly, it's easy to do a template and just put out the facts. But for lifestyle writing, it's a bit more challenging. You really have to think about your words more. But in regards specifically to music, so I did have to teach myself a bit more and definitely learn more about that. And I think that looking back at the things I initially wrote, I hate looking back at things I initially wrote. I think they're not very good, but I think I've really come a long way in that journey and been able to teach myself a lot. Some of the articles I've done that I'm really proud of, I wrote one about Annabelle England with her Messing with Magic album, which I think I did a good job of. I hope other people think so too. And Flux Pavilion recently released an album that was totally different from his usual sound. And so getting to talk to him about that and the way I wrote about it, I'm pretty proud of myself for that. And I just love getting to be able to speak to artists. I feel really privileged in that sense, and really getting to dive into their brain deeper and getting to understand it more, which helps with how I write as well.
Do they feel pretty open? Because I think, they hear Forbes, and sometimes I have found in a lot of ways artists, especially that have come on this show or the other show, sometimes very, very humble, like, is this a fit? And you're like, you're exactly a fit. Because I want to talk to you about, I mean, have they been open to discussing their journey or their album or the creativity?
Yeah, most definitely. I haven't asked any question where someone was like, oh, I don't feel comfortable answering that. I feel if you know the right questions to ask, then they're very receptive and willing to talk about those things and give you really good answers. The only question I ask sometimes that people are like, ooh, this one's hard, is I always say, can you describe your sound in 3 words? And obviously for artists, their sound goes so many ways, or at least for most producers. So that one could be a bit challenging. But yeah, besides that, everyone has been really open to talking about their creative process.
Yeah. I can see that. That would be hard, especially you're asking an artist, and a short answer for an artist is it's like, how much time do you got? Right. And you're also, before we jumped onto the podcast, we're talking a little bit about food and that's also a big passion of yours. and obviously with Anthony Bourdain and Kitchen Confidential. How's that been like, writing about food, the current state of affairs, food
Mhm.
and music, current state of affairs? Feel free to
Mhm.
go in any direction you want.
Yeah, so touching on food, it's something that I've had to get away from a little bit, and I'm really trying to delve more back into because during the pandemic, it was just so difficult to go to restaurants and review them, which is mainly what I do. I did do a few roundup stories, but it was such like a more complicated space to be writing in. And obviously that's when they deserve the most love, and I was really trying my best. And going with music coming out of COVID or in COVID, there was so many interviews I did about events that just were like, nope, not happening. So lots of interviews I couldn't put up, but so many artists were taking this time to really delve into the creativity and
Mm.
look into different sounds and things of that nature. So I found getting to interview artists during that time, even though there weren't any events, it was really cool speaking to people and learning how the pandemic has changed their approach and seeing people try new sounds and getting to discuss what led them to that and how it feels to be doing something so different from what they know for, what they're known for, particularly because a lot of the artists I talk to, because they're dance music artists, their work is typically made for the live show experience, at least for most of the people I've talked to. So hearing them talk about how that's so difficult for them to come back into because they haven't been able to test out songs for a live audience and having to figure out a different process and find ways to give people something that's similar to what what they usually make but not made for the club.
I was going to ask about that. Like, what were some of the biggest lessons that they shared with you? Like, hey, I'm not touring.
Yeah.
So, obviously they're going to experiment with sound and experiment with
Mhm.
time and things, but did they open up about, hey, I wasn't prepared for this, or I'm now having to rethink, how do I, earn a living? This is a very real thing. I think it was a very real thing, even for like artists that were making $1 million a month that
Mhm.
actually openly came out online to talk about that, say, oh, I made all my money from touring. And you're like, yes, like maybe I should open a merch store online and other things.
Yeah.
And I asked you because I had talked to a few Grammy artists that were, this is the same
Mhm.
thing. They're like, you get sometimes comfortable knowing that this is your only way of doing things. And
Yeah.
suddenly you realize, oh, wait, I have to make changes anyways, regardless. This time just showed me how to make changes. Did they share some of their biggest lessons with you like that?
A good amount of them said that they were trying to go into other creative outlets,
Yeah.
such as like clothing wear
Yeah.
or doing like live streams where they were able to raise money or different things of that nature. But it's been really interesting talking to a lot of them while they had this break in producing music. A lot of people said they're usually used to making music on the road, and now they actually had to build a studio to make it at home, which I just
Hmm.
thought was so crazy. You would think some of these huge names have studios at home, but they're never home. And also, a lot of people have talked about how they're able to rethink fitness and their lifestyle because they're so used to like not sleeping and being on tour and always on flights and things of that nature. So this really gave them time to like sit back and be like, wow, I need to eat better. I need to sleep more. I need to focus on these things that are actually good for me and think of ways that I can implement these going forward when I am touring.
Yeah, fascinating to watch how a musician or producer, all of the lifestyle pre
Mhm.
COVID and then during and post COVID, like, oh, wait a minute, why don't I have a studio at home? And how would I use the internet to connect differently? I mean, we know we use Instagram for them to know about the shows and stuff like that, but like, how do I actually rethink, the digital paradigm? For me, it was coming full circle. I mean, imagine you're pitching the internet to the world for 20 years and people are finally like, oh, wait a minute, I think we have to use this internet thing, don't we? Differently. It's like,
Yeah.
maybe, you know.
Yeah, and some of the artists that I've talked to, they've also said like doing like weekly streams or demo reviews or other things of that nature has helped them connect with their audiences more. And for
Yes.
some of them, they're hoping that things like that will help new people discover their music. So then when they're able to go out to shows again, they could be like, oh, I like this person, this artist, and now I want to attend one of their shows. Or some people who usually only listen to their music for a live show then they can listen to more of their stuff on Spotify now and things like that. So kind of opening the door a bit to different types of fans and how they can interact in different ways.
Such a powerful point you bring up, because they're now having to sit still and have a conversation and build community with their audience,
Mhm.
and explore the relationship with them, right? And
Yeah.
then it only solidifies and grows them even more. It allows them to ground more into their, their who they are and their authenticity.
Mhm.
And B, yeah, have more people learn about the music. Like, oh, we're having this great conversation over here that we wouldn't have normally had, and now we're
Yeah.
having it, whether it's on Instagram or Clubhouse or wherever. And then also learn about, not just learn about the audience, learn about them, but them learn about the audience. Like, oh, like that's incredible
Yeah.
music. Like, let's do something together. You see a lot of
Mhm.
that happening too. You know.
Yeah, definitely.
I also wanted to, ask your content management for, an investment firm. You write for Forbes Life, which I love, and I think we were talking before the podcast of this idea of, expressing yourself across platforms. Sometimes people feel afraid to do that. What do you say to people like that, they don't feel like they can, or they feel confined to like just this one thing?
Well, I feel like if you have the ability to do things outside of your one job, I think it's really important to take advantage of that. I also freelance for another website that focuses on music. I write about weekly live streams. And I feel like it's just so important to have your voice heard if you have something to say. I'm quite chatty. So I love
Keep
that
going, keep
I can
going.
always keep having stuff to say and that people can read it. And I love having that ability to just being able to put myself out there. And I would suggest other people do that as well if they have that ability with their full-time job.
And earlier you said something that was great, which is you're like, I look back at my writing, I'm like, ooh, I think everybody. I look back to some of my stuff from 6, 7, 8 years ago. I'm like, oh, I might have had a small chip on my shoulder, but that's also what a lot of people like the edge. As I was becoming more and more spiritual, and they I think they like to like, yeah, yes, let's rise up and take our power back. But I look back at some of the writing, but I think it's important for people to know, like, look, just do whatever is your best at this given point in time, because it's always going to be evolving,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, most definitely. I feel like the more you practice it, the better
Yeah.
you get. And definitely with when you're able to work with different platforms. For example, I don't have an editor at Forbes who reads I do have an editor, but she doesn't read my stuff before it goes up. Like I said, we publish at will.
Hmm.
So I think that having to do that and having to be my own editor has been a really great experience and making sure that I know when to cut my darlings, as they say, and use different words and things like that. But the other place I do freelance for, I actually do have an editor, and I feel like I've been able to learn a lot through her editing my work. So I think for those who are trepidatious about putting their voice out there on different platforms, I think you're able to learn so much, particularly on the experience you're having with it and the ways that you can diversify your voice or make it fit for that kind of audience. Because the two sites I write for have very different voices.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very Gary Vee about it. Publish it. Just push it. Push the button.
Yeah.
Push the button. Push the
Yeah.
button. Like, but wait, it's not perfect. I'm like, it'll never be perfect. Push the button. Just push the button. I'm
Exactly.
telling you, just push the button. It'll always get better and better and better. And the funny thing too is sometimes, I mean, you're obviously a part of big platforms, but sometimes I tell people, I'm like, listen, like, you have plenty of time to practice in public in front of people, because as big as we think that the article is going to get viewed by the world, it technically takes time for our content to, to get to get viewed over the long haul. So just, build in public, publish it, push the button, right?
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of pushing the button, I did have a professor say if we waited for every story to be perfect, we would never publish anything.
No.
Um, and also regarding views, I find it interesting that sometimes the things that I'm so passionate about, I'm like, this needs to be heard. This is great. They get the lowest views. And I've done things with like food writing, or I think it was I wrote about a pop up bar with a Games of Thrones theme, which I was like, oh, this is cool. This is fun. And it got so many views, and not this like in depth like feature story I wrote that was so interesting. It just really depends. You can't take it to heart.
That is the number one thing every content creator experiences period.
Yeah.
Hands down, across every industry. I've been saying it for years, and it's the funniest thing. Our episode 1 of this show, Younger said the same thing. Younger is an international musician artist, and I mean, he had been for a long time. He did the song that it went viral, like 50 million plus, views and streams, and it's like, that's the one, okay. And it happens to all of us, because you could be creating a piece of content, you're like, oh my god, this is gonna crush it, this is gonna be like the greatest piece of content, everybody's gonna love it, like I'm feeling it, like, and because it's power, it's strength. And sure enough, you push that button and it's like, really, like, did I push it at the wrong time of the day? Is it just like, is the algorithm just not being that, like, this was this, like, but you guys like this other piece, it was like 3 words, and thousands of you shared it. It's so funny. And I think that leads to the point, push the button, just keep pushing the button. Like,
Yes.
and there is, I know that there's sometimes you get these quirky people online that say, I will make your content go viral. Like, let's just be honest, outside of the algorithms, there's really no rhyme or reason. You just get something at the right time that strikes the right chord with the public and in the right context and everything, and voila, virality. And that doesn't even make you, because you still have to keep going. We still keep creating every day, every week, and because it's an ever going journey and a process, right?
Most definitely.
Right. Yeah. So it's so funny when you bring that up, and Matt Orlove and I, we've had this conversation many times, and just everybody, and in every industry, they experience the same thing. It's like, really, that's the piece that went viral? Like, oh, okay. And you don't necessarily want to cater to that too, right? Like, there've been pieces where I'm like, that went viral, but I don't want to try to replicate that. I want to honor and respect it. It went viral, but I don't want to be so confined that I have to do things constantly like that to get the virality, because as you and I both know, and content creators, a lot of times they do, because they like, oh, if this gets the likes and views, then that's all I'll do. And I'm like, but you're so much more than that. Don't allow that to limit you, right? So
Yeah, definitely.
right. What do you have coming up that you're excited about, or that, any pieces that you're working on, or, now that we're in some kind of a time, I'm not really sure what to say about it, but, when it comes to like, with music and food, and we're kind of reemerging and things like that, where do you see yourself expanding right now, or having, to, express more of your content right now?
So I'm getting more back into food writing, which I'm so excited about. I love food.
Amazing.
So I'm really excited to be able to go to more restaurants, check them out, and write about them if I think they're great and worth writing about. During the pandemic, I was mostly writing about releases from artists, because that's pretty much the only news that was going on besides live streams. So I'm hoping that with the return of events, then that'll become something that I'm able to explore more. So those are 2 exciting things I have coming up. But right now, I feel like it seems there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's still a bit long. So hopefully things keep getting better and we can get back to real life, and I can get back into those passions and be able to do the things I was doing before the pandemic.
Yeah, and with some new lessons thrown in there, and some new, it's just like the artists, I feel like last year they learned, okay, I still want to do touring. I want to get back to touring. I think I want to diversify a little bit. I think I want to do some home production. I think I want to do, some touring. I think I want to do some merchandise. I think I want to do some, community work. Like, I feel like it gets to kind of create this new paradigm moving forward, and a more expansive one. Well, at least that's what we can hope. So, incredible. Where can like everybody find you online, or read more of your work, and reach out to you if they'd like?
So my author bio page at Forbes Life is, you just type in Lisa Kocay. You can find me there. Kocay. My last name's a little confusing. My handle is the same on both Instagram, on Twitter, with Lisa Kocay.
Amazing. Thank you so much, for talking about, the voice, bringing the voice forward, diversifying it. Again, I can't say this enough. I think that it's so important for people to feel like, hey, well, yeah, I'm a music producer, but I like talking about finance, or I'm also into fitness and health, and I'm writing a book. And I feel like you're seeing it more and more. I remember I saw, like, it was like Russ, I think, online. Like, I remember at one point, besides publishing and doing all of his own stuff. He's like, hey, I wrote a book. You can download it here. I'm like, yes. Like, it makes sense. Like, we're the author of our own destiny, right? We're the author of our own life. So thank you for sharing all of that. And if you could give any advice to anybody, wanting to explore their creativity, what would it be?
So the best piece of advice I got was when a professor told me, write like things matter because if you do, then they will.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really important thing to bring into your work. If
So true.
you put like passion and write about things like this is important and this is why you should know about it, that really is captivating to other people and makes them more interested in your articles.
So true. I love when people said long form content's coming back. I'm like, I didn't know it left because like my Instagram posts are long in the caption, but that's also because it's like I was using that to blog and like talk to
Mhm.
to the audience and they would read it. And but you're right, like it matters because it really does. And
Mhm.
the content that's the stickiest is I feel like the content that's felt like, oh wow, you get me. Like, yeah, I get you. Like I'm you, you're me. We're inhabiting this planet, and we're sharing similar thoughts in a particular topic. Or you're not alone. I think most people will be like, "Oh, I was feeling the same way." So, very very profound advice. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate you taking the time and talking about this, and especially since it's a very important topic to me. So so automatically, I probably shouldn't assume it is for everybody else, but I definitely think that I want people to feel comfortable expressing their voice, or at least getting
Mhm.
comfortable and then building up from there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And it was great to chat with you.
Absolutely. For everybody listening, Lisa Kocay, you can read her work on Forbes Life. You can find her on Twitter and on Instagram, Lisa Kocay, Kocay. But it'll also be in the show notes. So you guys will be able to find her. No problem. We'll make sure. Those of you that are listening on Spotify or Apple, Google Play, and every other platform, you can also watch this video on our Orlove YouTube channel. We do weekly launches of this, and you can get in the conversation there. But also, you guys can check out the show notes, and you'll be able to find Lisa through there. You'll be able to subscribe to us. We appreciate each and every person tuning in on top of the covers. It really means a lot to us in our movement and to the contribution of music, culture, and culture. And also, thank you guys for all giving us feedback and being part of the journey. Please continue to leave us 5-star reviews on Apple. It does help our reach, and we do want to grow the show. Sometimes we still have the algorithm to play with, but we are grateful for all the reviews that are coming in, and we're just grateful to have you. And thank you guys so much. And we'll be talking to you soon. We're out.